I am Claire, 34 years old, and the proud owner of Artisan Design Studio in Boston. After spending 10 years building my business in Chicago, I recently moved back to my hometown, hoping to reconnect with my parents and younger brother. When my mother texted inviting me to a family dinner, I felt a spark of hope despite our strained relationship. I arrived at the restaurant looking my best, but instead of a warm welcome, my mother pointed to a small table in the back corner. "You can sit there. We need space for the real group." Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family. Growing up in Brookline, an affluent Boston suburb, I always felt like I was performing on a stage rather than living in a home. My father, Robert, was a successful investment banker who worked 16-hour days and traveled constantly. When he was home, he was either locked in his office or too exhausted to engage with the family. My mother, Diana, on the other hand, was ever present but in the most suffocating way possible. Diana Marshall was the undisputed queen of Boston society. The daughter of old money, she married my father partly for love, but mostly because he had the ambition and drive to maintain the lifestyle she considered her birthright. Everything in our household revolved around appearances. Our Georgian colonial home was featured in architectural magazines. The gardens won local awards. Even the family dog was a purebred golden retriever named Windsor, who had his own grooming schedule. From my earliest memories, I understood that my primary value was as an accessory to the perfect family image my mother was crafting. I was dressed in smock dresses from expensive children's boutiques, enrolled in ballet and piano lessons, not because I showed any particular aptitude, but because that's what girls from good families did. My naturally curly hair was regularly straightened because my mother thought it looked untidy. My slightly crooked teeth were corrected with braces by age 8 years before most children. My younger brother James, 3 years my junior, somehow managed to fit effortlessly into the family mold. He was athletic, charming, and seemed to instinctively understand the social rules that always felt foreign to me. While I questioned everything and struggled against constraints, James adapted. He played the right sports, made friends with the right children, and never seemed to disappoint our parents. I still remember my 8th grade art competition. My watercolor painting won first place in the state, and I was ecstatic. The award ceremony was on a Thursday evening, conflicting with one of my mother's charity committee meetings. She didn't even consider rescheduling. My father was away on business as usual. I took the bus to the ceremony and accepted my award alone, watching other winners being photographed with proud parents. That same month, James participated in a soccer tournament where his team placed 4th. Both my parents attended every game, and my mother hosted a celebration dinner afterward. My sweet 16th birthday was another painful memory. Instead of inviting my small circle of artistic friends from the school photography club, my mother planned an elaborate party with the children of her social connections. I spent the evening feeling like a stranger at my own celebration, making awkward conversation with classmates I barely knew, while my mother networked with their parents. By the time I graduated high school, I had learned to keep my expectations low. I had been accepted to Rhode Island School of Design with a partial scholarship for graphic design, but my parents dismissed it as a hobby rather than a real career path. To gain their approval, I turned down RISD and accepted admission to Boston University's business program instead. Even then, at my college graduation, my parents attended the ceremony, but left immediately after missing the departmental reception, where I was honored for my thesis project combining business strategy with design thinking. After graduation, I made the decision to move to Chicago. I needed distance from the constant disappointment of trying and failing to earn my family's approval. With a small loan from my grandmother, who had always been my quiet supporter, I started a graphic design business focused on helping small businesses develop their brand identities. The first few years were incredibly difficult. I worked from a tiny studio apartment, often taking on freelance office work to make ends meet. My parents viewed my struggle as confirmation that I had made a poor choice. During our infrequent phone calls, my mother never failed to mention how well James was doing in his finance career, following in our father's footsteps. She would casually drop comments like, "It's not too late to come home and get a proper job with your father's connections." Despite their lack of faith, or perhaps because of it, I poured everything into making my business succeed. By year 3, I had secured several major clients and moved into a small office space. By year 5, I had 3 employees and a portfolio of work that was beginning to win industry recognition. And by year 10, Artisan Design Studio had 20 employees' offices in downtown Chicago and a national reputation for innovative branding work. Throughout those years, I made periodic attempts to reconnect with my family. I would visit Boston for holidays, bringing thoughtfully selected gifts, and trying to engage in conversations about something other than my perceived failures. These visits inevitably ended with me feeling diminished and returning to Chicago emotionally exhausted. Last year, I made the decision to expand my business to the East Coast, opening a Boston office. Part of me hoped that seeing my success firsthand might finally earn my parents' respect. I rented a beautiful brownstone apartment in South End and threw myself into establishing the new location. For the first few months, my parents acknowledged my return to Boston with the same distant politeness they had always shown. We had occasional Sunday dinners where my mother would dominate the conversation with updates about James, his wife Amanda, and their circle of friends. My father would ask cursory questions about my business, but seemed uninterested in the answers. So when my mother texted me about a family dinner at Sorellina, one of Boston's most upscale Italian restaurants, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. The message seemed warmer than usual. "Claire, we'd love for you to join us for dinner this Friday at Sorellina at 7. It's been too long since we've had a proper family gathering." Looking back, I should have known better than to expect anything different. But hope is a persistent thing, especially when it comes to family. I spent hours getting ready for that dinner, trying on different outfits, wanting to look successful, but not trying too hard. I finally settled on a simple black sheath dress with a statement necklace from a local artisan I had collaborated with. Professional but creative. The kind of outfit that said I was comfortable in my own skin. The drive to the restaurant was filled with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety. I rehearsed topics of conversation, determined to keep things positive. My new office space, the client work that had recently won a regional advertising award. Anything to find common ground with my family. Sorellina was located in the heart of downtown Boston, its modern Italian cuisine making it a favorite among the city's elite. The interior was sleek and sophisticated, with dark wood leather seating and soft lighting creating an intimate atmosphere despite the restaurant's size. As I handed my car to the valet and walked toward the entrance, I took deep, calming breaths. My mother was waiting in the lobby, impeccably dressed in a navy blue St. John knit suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, diamond studs gleaming in her ears. She air-kissed my cheeks, her perfume expensive and familiar. "Claire, you look well," she said, her eyes quickly scanning my outfit. I caught the slightest tightening of her lips, a barely perceptible sign of disapproval I had been conditioned to notice since childhood. "Thanks, Mom. You look lovely as always," I replied, determined to start the evening on a positive note. "The rest of the group is already seated," she said, turning toward the main dining room. I followed her, assuming the rest of the group meant my father and brother, perhaps, with James's wife, Amanda. As we walked through the restaurant, I spotted my father's familiar profile at a large round table in the center of the room. Next to him sat James and Amanda, but there were also 4 other people I didn't immediately recognize. Before we reached the table, my mother stopped and gestured to a small table tucked against the back wall away from the main dining area. "You can sit there," she said matter-of-factly. "We need space for the real group." I stood frozen, the words hitting me like a physical blow. The real group. As if I was an afterthought, an obligation, someone who didn't belong with the family. From the main table, I could now see that the additional guests included the Williamsons, longtime friends of my parents, and another couple I vaguely recognized from my parents' country club. This wasn't a family dinner at all. It was a social gathering where I was being quite literally sidelined. In that moment, I had a choice. I could walk out making a scene but preserving my dignity. I could confront my mother demanding to know why I had been misled. Or I could swallow my pride and take the seat at the isolated table, enduring another evening of subtle humiliation. Something inside me shifted. Years of seeking approval, of making myself smaller to fit into their expectations, of walking away hurt, but never standing up for myself, crystallized into a new resolution. I would neither leave nor confront. Not yet. Fine, I said, my voice steady, despite the emotion churning inside me. I walked to the small table and sat down, placing my purse on the chair opposite me. A server approached almost immediately, his expression sympathetic. He had clearly witnessed the exchange. "Good evening, miss. Can I get you something to drink?" "I'll have a glass of the Barolo, please," I said, selecting one of the most expensive wines by the glass on the menu. As the server left, I glanced toward the main table. My father was engrossed in conversation with Mr. Williamson. James was laughing at something his wife said, while my mother was already regaling the group with some story, her hands gesturing elegantly. None of them looked in my direction. From my isolated position, I could hear snippets of their conversation. They were discussing a recent trip to Nantucket, a weekend getaway that included everyone at the table. Another family event I hadn't been informed about, much less invited to. The server returned with my wine, setting it down with an extra napkin. "Let me know if you need anything else," he said kindly. As I sipped my wine, watching my family enjoy themselves at a distance, a strange calm replaced my initial hurt. This wasn't new behavior, just a more blatant version of the exclusion I had experienced my entire life. But for the first time, I wasn't going to accept it quietly. I observed my mother ordering appetizers for the table, my father nodding along. They were creating the perfect picture of genial hosts, while I sat alone like a stranger. The contrast was so stark, it was almost comical. A plan began forming in my mind. I caught the server's eye and gestured for him to approach my table. "Is everything all right with the wine?" he asked. "It's perfect," I said quietly. "I have an unusual request. I'd like to cover the bill for that table." I nodded toward my family's group. "But I don't want them to know until the end of the meal." The server looked uncertain. "The entire bill?" "Yes." I confirmed, sliding my credit card across the table. "Hold this, and when they finish, charge everything to my card. Tell them it's been taken care of by the family member at the other table." He took my card, still looking unsure. "It's fine, really," I assured him. "It's a family matter." As he walked away, I felt a strange sense of power. For once, I was taking control of the narrative. I pulled out my phone, pretending to be absorbed in work emails, while actually watching the drama unfold from a distance. The expensive wine was flowing freely at the main table, and my mother was already instructing the server about which appetizers to bring. It was going to be an expensive lesson, but some lessons are worth the price. From my quiet corner, I had a perfect vantage point to observe the family dynamics I had been entangled in my entire life. My mother, Diana, was clearly the conductor of this social orchestra. She directed conversation with subtle cues, a slight touch on someone's arm to signal their turn to speak, a pointed question to steer topics in preferred directions. Everyone at the table responded to her social choreography, some more willingly than others. My father, Robert, sat at her right hand, playing his well-established role of successful provider. He ordered wine with authority, discussing vintages with the sommelier, but deferred to my mother on all social matters. Occasionally, I caught a flicker of something in his expression when he glanced at my lonely table, perhaps discomfort or guilt, but he quickly masked it by taking a drink or rejoining the conversation. James, my golden child brother, was in his element. He had always thrived in these settings, inheriting our mother's social grace and our father's business acumen. His wife Amanda, however, seemed less comfortable. She smiled at appropriate times and nodded along, but there was a stiffness to her posture that suggested she was performing rather than enjoying herself. What struck me most was how the family friends at the table seemed completely unaware of the situation. The Williamsons, who had known me since childhood, greeted me with casual waves when they first noticed me, but appeared to accept without question that I was sitting separately. The other couple didn't acknowledge me at all, possibly not even knowing who I was. As appetizers arrived at their table, my mother launched into an elaborate story about a charity gala she had recently helped organize. "It was such a success," she gushed. "We raised over $200,000 for children's literacy, and the promotional materials were absolutely beautiful." My ears perked up at this. My Boston office had designed those materials. The Literacy Foundation was one of my first local clients. After moving back, and we had donated a significant portion of our fee to support the cause. Mrs. Williamson nodded appreciatively. I noticed the brochures and invitations. The design was so elegant yet modern. "Who did you use?" My mother smiled. "Oh, Amanda helped connect us with a wonderful design firm," she said, gesturing toward my brother's wife, who looked momentarily startled before composing her features. "They were very reasonable, and so easy to work with." I nearly choked on my wine. Not only was my mother taking credit for finding the design firm that I owned, but she was giving that credit to Amanda. It was such a blatant erasure of my contribution that I almost laughed out loud at the absurdity. What made it even more ironic was that Mr. Williamson's investment company was also my client. We had redesigned their entire brand identity the previous quarter. Did he not make the connection, or was the compartmentalization of my existence so complete that no one thought to mention it? I noticed my brother James glancing in my direction, a flash of what looked like guilt crossing his face, before he quickly returned his attention to his wife. He knew exactly what was happening. He was complicit in this charade. I took another sip of my wine and pulled out my phone, texting my oldest friend Sarah. Sitting alone at Soralina while my family entertains at the main table. Mom just took credit for my design work, contemplating my next move. Sarah, who had witnessed my family dynamic for decades, responded immediately, "That's horrible but not surprising. Remember your worth. Their approval isn't necessary for your success. What are you thinking of doing?" I smiled at her message. Sarah had always been my reality check, the friend who saw me clearly when my family looked right through me. My therapist in Chicago had helped me understand that my constant seeking of parental approval was a pattern that needed to be broken for my own well-being. "I'm staging a little financial intervention," I typed back. "We'll fill you in later." As I put my phone down, I mentally calculated what the dinner was likely to cost. The table of 8 had already gone through 2 bottles of premium wine at over $150 each. The appetizers they shared would add another $200. Main courses at Soralina ranged from $40 to $60 per person, and knowing my mother's penchant for ordering the most expensive items plus additional wine desserts and coffee, the final bill would likely exceed $1,500. It was an extravagant amount, but I could afford it. My business had been profitable for years, and the Boston expansion was already exceeding projections. More importantly, it would be worth every penny to finally make a statement my family couldn't ignore. The waiter stopped by my table again. "Just checking if everything is still according to plan," he said quietly. I nodded. "Yes, thank you. And I'd like another glass of the Barolo, please." As he left to get my second glass of wine, I settled in for what was promising to be a very interesting evening. 2 hours into this elaborate social performance, I remained at my isolated table nursing my second glass of wine and occasionally checking work emails on my phone. The main table had grown louder as the wine flowed freely. My mother had ordered a second round of appetizers for the table to share, followed by the most expensive entrees on the menu. My father had selected additional bottles of wine, including a $300 Brunello for the table to enjoy with their main courses. I was contemplating whether to order dessert, just to extend the evening, when I noticed my brother James excuse himself from the table and walk in my direction. He approached with a slightly sheepish expression, hands in his pockets. "Hey, Claire," he said, hovering awkwardly beside my table. "James," I replied coolly. "Enjoying your dinner?" He sighed and pulled out the chair opposite me. "Look, this is awkward. I wanted to check if you're okay." Am I okay sitting alone at a back table while my family enjoys a lavish dinner 20 feet away? What do you think, James? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. Mom said you'd prefer to have your own space since you don't know the Williamsons' friends. That's interesting considering I've known the Williamsons my entire life. And funny how no one asked what I'd prefer. James ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture he'd had since childhood. You know how Mom is. She had this dinner planned with specific seating arrangements. When you agreed to come, she didn't want to rearrange everything. So she put me at a separate table instead. That makes perfect sense, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. I'm not saying it's right, he admitted quietly. Did you know about this setup beforehand? His hesitation told me everything I needed to know. You did, I said flatly. And you didn't think to warn me or suggest an alternative. Claire, you know challenging Mom just makes things worse. I thought it would be easier for everyone if we just went along with it. He leaned forward. The business associates are leaving soon. You could join us for dessert. I looked at my brother, really looked at him. At 31, James was handsome and successful, following perfectly in our father's footsteps at the investment firm. Yet beneath his confident exterior, I could still see the little boy desperate for our mother's approval, willing to sacrifice anyone else's feelings to maintain his favored status. That's your solution. I should wait alone until your important guests leave, and then maybe I can be permitted to join the real family. No thank you, James. I'm fine right here. Claire, don't be difficult. Mom's trying in her way. Is she? Because from where I'm sitting, quite literally, it doesn't look like she's trying at all. I took a sip of wine. How was Nantucket, by the way? The weekend sounded lovely from what I could overhear. James had the decency to look guilty. It was just a last-minute thing. Mom and Dad invited us to use the house for the weekend, and the Williamsons were already going to be there. And somehow, in all that last-minute planning, no one thought to call me. Remarkable. I'm sorry, he said, and for a moment I thought he might truly mean it. Things have always been complicated between you and Mom. Things aren't complicated, James. They're actually very simple. Our mother has consistently treated me as an afterthought my entire life, and everyone else, including you and Dad, has enabled her behavior. I set my glass down carefully. But that's not even what bothers me the most. What bothers me is that she took credit for my work tonight. What are you talking about? The literacy foundation materials that Mom was bragging about, my firm designed those. We even donated part of our fee to support the cause. But instead of acknowledging that she gave credit to Amanda for finding some unnamed design firm, James shifted uncomfortably. I'm sure she didn't mean anything by it. She never does, right? It's always just an oversight, never a pattern of deliberate exclusion and dismissal. My brother glanced back at the main table where our mother was watching us with narrowed eyes. I should get back. Are you sure you don't want to join us later? I shook my head. I'm perfectly fine where I am, James. Enjoy your dinner. As he returned to the main table, I saw him lean down to whisper something to our mother, who glanced sharply in my direction before turning deliberately away. My father caught my eye briefly but quickly looked down at his plate. I scrolled through my phone, opening my email to find a message from my assistant about a potential new client, a major Boston-based tech company looking to rebrand. Despite everything happening around me, I felt a surge of pride. My business was thriving because of my talent and hard work, not because of family connections or advantages. As I responded to the email confirming a meeting for the following week, I noticed the server approaching the main table with dessert menus. Another server followed with coffee service. The evening was approaching its conclusion, and soon my little financial surprise would be revealed. I watched as my father requested the check, ever the patriarch taking care of the bill. The server nodded and walked away, returning moments later with a black leather folder, which he placed discreetly next to my father. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what would happen next. Years of therapy had taught me that confrontation wasn't something to fear, but sometimes a necessary step toward healing. This particular confrontation might not lead to reconciliation with my family, but it would be an assertion of my own worth and dignity. I watched as my father opened the check folder, his expression changing from casual interest to confusion to shock. He pulled out his reading glasses to examine the bill more closely, his face growing redder by the second. My mother leaned over her perfectly maintained composure, slipping as she stared at the total. My father raised his hand, summoning the server back to the table with an urgent gesture. Even from my distance, I could hear him demand, "There must be some mistake. Why is it over $1,700? The server responded calmly, though I couldn't hear his exact words. My father's expression grew even more thunderous as the server gestured in my direction. Every head at the table turned to look at me. It was time. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked deliberately toward the main table. The 20 steps from my isolated table to my family's gathering felt like crossing a threshold I could never return from. Every eye at the table was fixed on me as I approached, expressions ranging from confusion to anger. My father was standing now, the check clutched in his hand, his face flushed with anger. "Claire, what is the meaning of this?" he demanded as I reached the table. "The server says you arranged to pay our bill but charged it to our table. Is this some kind of joke?" My mother cut in before I could respond. "Lower your voice, Robert," she hissed, ever conscious of appearances. "People are watching." I smiled, calm in the face of their discomfort. "It's not a joke. I thought since this was a family dinner, as Mom's text stated, it would be appropriate for me to treat everyone, although I was surprised to find it wasn't actually a family dinner at all, but rather a social gathering where I was deliberately separated from the rest of you." "Don't be dramatic, Claire," my mother said dismissively. "We needed the space for everyone, and you arrived late." "I arrived exactly at 7, the time you specified," I replied evenly, "and there's plenty of room at this table. You chose to seat me separately because that's where you've always placed me, metaphorically speaking, on the periphery of this family." My father interjected, "This is hardly the time or place for this discussion. I'll take care of the bill and we can talk about this later." "No," I said firmly. "I think this is exactly the right time and place. For once, I'd like to address the elephant in the room while it's actually still in the room, rather than pretending everything is fine until we're all safely back in our separate spaces." The Williamsons and the other couple looked profoundly uncomfortable. Mrs. Williamson made a move as if to leave, but my mother placed a restraining hand on her arm. "Claire is just having one of her moments," my mother said with a forced laugh. "She's always been so sensitive." Something inside me snapped at her dismissal. Years of suppressed feelings came rushing to the surface. "I'm not having a moment, Mother. I'm finally speaking the truth after decades of swallowing it to make you comfortable. You invited me to a family dinner, then seated me at a separate table like an unwanted stranger. You've taken credit for my professional work while pretending I'm not even in the room. And this isn't new behavior. It's just a more blatant version of how you've treated me my entire life." My voice remained steady, though emotions churned inside me. "Do you remember my 8th grade art competition? I won first place in the state, and neither of you bothered to come to the ceremony. That same month, you threw a party for James's team, placing 4th in a local soccer tournament." My father had the grace to look ashamed, but my mother's expression hardened. "Or what about my college graduation? You left immediately after the ceremony, missing the departmental honors where I received an award for my thesis. You've consistently treated my accomplishments as trivial and my career as a hobby, despite the fact that I've built a nationally recognized design firm from scratch." I turned to the Williamsons. "Did you know that my firm designed the new branding for your company, Mr. Williamson? Or that we created the materials for the literacy foundation that my mother was just taking credit for arranging? Probably not, because in this family my existence is treated as an inconvenient detail that doesn't fit the preferred narrative." Mr. Williamson looked startled. "Your firm is Artisan Design Studio. Harold speaks very highly of your work. I had no idea you were the founder." My mother's lips thinned to a tight line. "Claire, you're embarrassing yourself and the family. This is exactly why we sometimes need to manage social situations carefully. You always make everything about you." I laughed, genuinely amused by the irony. "That's rich coming from you, Mother. Everything has always been about you, your social standing, your perfect family image. I've spent my life trying to contort myself to fit that image, and it's never been enough." "Well, I'm done trying." James spoke up, his voice quiet but firm. "She's not wrong, Mom. We do treat Claire differently. We always have." The shock of my brother actually standing up for me momentarily silenced everyone at the table. Amanda, his wife, squeezed his hand supportively. My mother recovered quickly. "This is absurd. We've always supported both our children equally. If Claire chooses to see slights where none exist, that's her issue to work through." "Is it really just my perception?" I asked, looking around the table. "Dad, when was the last time you asked about my business with genuine interest, James? When did you last invite me to a family gathering that wasn't a major holiday? And Mother, have you ever even once expressed pride in what I've accomplished without qualifying it or comparing it to something or someone else?" The silence that followed was deafening. My father stared at the table, unable to meet my eyes. James looked torn between loyalty to our mother and recognition of the truth in my words. Amanda watched the scene with quiet compassion. My mother, however, was not one to concede defeat. "If you feel excluded, Claire, perhaps you should consider why. You've always been different, difficult, unwilling to make the effort to fit in. Do you think it's easy to love someone who constantly rejects everything we value?" Her words hung in the air, the closest she had ever come to admitting the truth, that her love was conditional, dependent on my compliance with her expectations. "You're right about one thing," I said finally. "I am different. I don't value social standing over authenticity. I don't believe that appearances matter more than genuine connections. And I've built my life around those beliefs, creating a business that celebrates uniqueness, rather than conformity, surrounding myself with friends who accept me as I am, rather than as they wish me to be." I reached for the check folder and removed my credit card. "Dinner is on me as a parting gift. Because after tonight, I won't be available for these performances anymore. I have a real family mother made up of people who choose to love and support me without conditions. Some of them are related by blood, but most aren't. What they all have in common is that they value me for who I am, not who they want me to be." With that, I walked away from the table, stopping briefly to sign the credit card receipt at the host stand, before heading toward the exit. Behind me, I could hear my mother's attempts to smooth over the scene, my father's gruff voice asking for another drink, the awkward murmurs of the dinner guests. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't concerned with the aftermath of standing up for myself. I had finally said my truth out loud, and whatever came next, I would face it on my own terms. The cool night air hit my face as I exited the restaurant, bringing with it a rush of conflicting emotions. My hands shook slightly as I handed the valet my ticket, waiting for my car in the pool of golden light outside Sorolina. The confident poise I had maintained inside began to crumble now that I was alone. I managed to hold it together until I was safely in my car and a few blocks away from the restaurant. Then, parked on a quiet side street, I finally let the tears come. They weren't tears of sadness exactly, more a release of decades of pent-up hurt, anger, and disappointment. Years of seeking approval that was never going to come, of making myself smaller to fit into spaces that were deliberately designed to exclude me. Through my tears, I texted Sarah, "Can I come over? Family dinner went nuclear." Her response was immediate. "Doors open. Wine's ready." Instead of driving to my South End apartment, I headed to Sarah's place in Jamaica Plain. We had been friends since 6th grade, when Sarah defended me against bullies who mocked my art projects. While other friendships had come and gone, Sarah remained constant, one of the few people who had seen behind the perfect Marshall family facade from the beginning. Sarah was waiting at her door when I arrived, her curly hair pulled into a messy bun, wearing comfortable loungewear. One look at my face told her everything she needed to know. She pulled me into a tight hug without a word, then led me inside her cozy apartment. "Full disclosure or highlights?" she asked, handing me a glass of red wine, and settling next to me on her worn but comfortable couch. "Full disclosure," I replied, kicking off my heels and tucking my feet under me. I recounted the entire evening in detail from my mother's directive to sit at the separate table to my final declaration of independence. Sarah listened without interruption, her expressive face reflecting my own emotions as the story unfolded. When I finished, she raised her glass in a toast to finally saying what needed to be said. "I've been waiting 20 years for you to stand up to Diana Marshall." I clinked my glass against hers, managing a small smile. It felt both terrible and wonderful at the same time. Terrible to finally admit that I'll never have the mother I wanted, wonderful to stop pretending it's something I can change through effort or achievement. "Your mother is who she is," Sarah said thoughtfully. "And who she is, quite frankly, is a narcissistic nightmare who never deserved you." "She did one thing right," I said. "She gave birth to me." Low bar, Claire. Very low bar. Sarah refilled our glasses. "So what happens next?" I sighed, leaning back against the cushions. "I don't know. Part of me feels like I should just cut ties completely. Another part wonders if tonight might actually change something." "From what you've told me, your dad and brother seemed affected by what you said. Your mother, not so much." "That's the pattern. Dad feels guilty but does nothing. James recognizes the injustice but prioritizes keeping the peace. And mother rewrites reality to maintain her perfect self-image." I took another sip of wine. Maybe the difference now is that I no longer need any of that to change to be okay. Sarah reached over and squeezed my hand. "That's the real victory tonight. Not the confrontation itself, but the fact that you're finally free of needing their validation." I spent the night on Sarah's fold-out couch, emotionally exhausted, but also experiencing a strange sense of lightness. The next morning, over coffee, I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls and a text from my father. "We need to talk about last night. Call me when you can." There were also 2 missed calls from James and a longer text. "I'm sorry about last night. You didn't deserve that treatment and I should have said something sooner. I'd like to talk when you're ready." Notably absent was any communication from my mother. "Are you going to call them back?" Sarah asked, watching me scroll through the notifications. "Not today," I decided. "I need some space to process everything." After thanking Sarah for being my safe harbor, I drove back to my apartment and called my assistant to clear my schedule for the week. For the first time in my adult life, I was prioritizing my emotional well-being over work and family obligations. I spent the day in comfortable clothes, alternating between crying sleeping and staring out at the Boston skyline, allowing myself to feel the full weight of both loss and liberation. The following day, I reached out to my therapist in Chicago, scheduling a video session to work through the emotional aftermath of the confrontation. Dr. Lydia Monroe had helped me recognize the patterns in my family dynamic during my years in Chicago, and she provided valuable perspective now. "What you did took tremendous courage," she told me during our session. "Setting boundaries with family is among the hardest psychological work we do as adults, especially when there's a lifetime of conditioning to overcome." "I keep wondering if I went too far," I admitted. "That's the conditioning talking," Dr. Monroe replied. "You spoke your truth without cruelty. The discomfort others felt was in response to hearing that truth, not because your delivery was inappropriate." We discussed strategies for maintaining healthy boundaries moving forward, including limited contact, specific conversational topics, and removing my expectation for my mother to change. "The key is accepting who your family members actually are, not who you wish they were," Dr. Monroe explained. "From there, you can decide what kind of relationship is possible while protecting your own well-being." Later that week, I received an unexpected call from Amanda, my brother's wife. We had always been cordial, but never close, another consequence of my peripheral position in the family. "I just wanted to check on you," she said, "and to say that I've always admired how you built your career on your own terms." Her call revealed things I hadn't known, including that my mother had actively discouraged Amanda from getting to know me better. She always said you preferred to keep to yourself, that you weren't interested in family activities. I realize now that wasn't true. Amanda also shared that my mother had been particularly difficult in the days following the restaurant confrontation. She's telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown, but James and I know that's not what happened. You finally stood up for yourself. This conversation with Amanda was the first of several revelations that week. Mr. Williamson, apparently unaware of the family drama, sent an email inquiring about Artisan Design Studio services for another of his companies. A cousin I had always been close to called, after hearing through the family grapevine about the restaurant incident, offering support and sharing her own struggles with my mother's controlling behavior. After a week of reflection and distance, I finally responded to my father and brother, agreeing to meet them for lunch, just the three of us, at a neutral cafe. The conversation was uncomfortable but necessary, with both men acknowledging their role in enabling my mother's behavior over the years. I told myself I was keeping the peace, my father admitted, but I was really just taking the easy way out, letting your mother dictate how our family functioned, because confronting her seemed too difficult. James, too, expressed regret for his complicity. It was easier to go along with Mom's preferences than to challenge them. I knew how she treated you wasn't fair, but I was afraid of losing my own standing if I spoke up. While these acknowledgments didn't erase decades of hurt, they were steps toward a more honest relationship. We agreed to try building connections independent of my mother's influence, starting with monthly lunches and more direct communication. As for my mother, she remained silent for 2 full weeks before sending a brief email suggesting we put this unpleasantness behind us and move forward. There was no acknowledgement of her behavior, no apology, not even a recognition that anything needed to change. It was exactly what Dr. Monroe had prepared me for: the narcissist's prayer in action. That didn't happen. And if it did, it wasn't that bad. And if it was, it's not a big deal. And if it is, it's not my fault. I responded with equal brevity, stating that I was open to a relationship, but only one based on mutual respect. That would require acknowledgement of past patterns and a commitment to different behavior moving forward, I wrote. Until then, I think distance is healthiest for both of us. Her reply, when it came, was predictable. I've always respected you, Claire. If you choose to believe otherwise, that's your decision. And with those words, I knew that while my relationship with my father and brother might evolve, my mother would remain unchanged. The realization brought grief but also clarity. I could stop wasting energy trying to win the approval of someone incapable of giving it and focus instead on nurturing relationships with people who valued me as I was. 6 months after the restaurant confrontation, my life had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The most obvious change was in my relationship with my family. My father and I had established a new tradition of Sunday morning coffee, just the two of us. These meetings were sometimes awkward as we learned how to relate to each other without my mother's mediating presence, but they were also genuine in a way our interactions had never been before. I missed so much of your growing up, he admitted during one of these coffees. First, because I was always working then, because I couldn't see past your mother's version of events. I'd like to know who you really are, Claire, not who I assumed you were. These conversations revealed a man I had never fully known, someone who had his own regrets and disappointments, who had made compromises in his life just as I had in mine. We discovered shared interests in architecture and jazz, things we'd never discussed during family dinners dominated by my mother's agenda. My relationship with James had also evolved. We met monthly for dinner, sometimes with Amanda, sometimes just the two of us. During one particularly honest conversation, he confessed how he had benefited from being the favored child, but also felt trapped by the role. Everything came with conditions, he explained. The approval, the support, the opportunities, all of it dependent on following Mom's script exactly. I envied your courage to break away, even while I resented the extra pressure it put on me to be perfect. These revelations didn't erase the past hurts, but they created space for new understanding. I began to see how we had all been shaped by the same dysfunctional system, playing different roles, but all ultimately damaged by the experience. My mother, true to form, maintained her position that I was the problem. We had limited contact brief conversations at unavoidable family events, like James's birthday dinner, where she was unfailingly polite but emotionally distant. I had learned to accept this as the most she was capable of offering. Meanwhile, my business continued to thrive. The Boston office had expanded to a team of 15, taking on major clients throughout New England. The confrontation at the restaurant had unexpectedly raised my profile in certain Boston circles. Mr. Williamson, impressed by both my work and my authenticity, had recommended Artisan Design Studio to several associates, leading to contracts that significantly boosted our East Coast presence. But the most meaningful changes were internal. I no longer measured my worth by my family's recognition. I had stopped the exhausting practice of editing myself to fit their expectations. For the first time since childhood, I felt free to be fully myself, to make choices based on my own values rather than in reaction to theirs. This newfound freedom extended to my personal life as well. I began dating more openly, no longer anxious about whether potential partners would meet my mother's approval. I rekindled old friendships and formed new ones, creating what therapists call a chosen family of people who accepted and supported me unconditionally. Sarah remained my closest friend, the one person who had witnessed my entire journey. "You're different now," she observed over dinner one evening. "More confident, more at peace. It's like you finally stepped out from under a shadow you've been living in your whole life." One unexpected development was my growing mentorship of young women in business. A chance speaking engagement at a local college had led to regular meetings with aspiring female entrepreneurs, many of whom struggled with the same issues of family expectations and societal pressure that had defined my early career. Sharing my experiences with them gave purpose to my own struggles, transforming pain into wisdom that could benefit others. I had been particularly moved by a young design student named Taylor, whose conservative parents dismissed her creative ambitions as impractical and selfish. Seeing her struggle with the same need for approval that had consumed so much of my own life, I offered not just professional guidance, but emotional support. "Your parents' inability to see your gifts isn't a reflection of your value," I told her during one of our mentoring sessions. "It's a reflection of their limitations. The sooner you accept that their approval may never come, the sooner you can direct that energy toward building the life you actually want." It was advice I had needed to hear at her age, wisdom hard-won through years of trying and failing to be someone I wasn't designed to be. Watching Taylor begin to flourish as she freed herself from the need for parental validation was deeply healing for me as well. Then came an unexpected test of my new boundaries. My father suffered a minor heart attack, leading to a week in the hospital and a confrontation with his own mortality. I visited him daily, sometimes overlapping with my mother, who maintained her composure, but showed genuine concern for her husband of 40 years. During one of my visits, I found my father alone, looking unusually vulnerable in his hospital gown, monitors beeping softly beside him. "This changes your perspective," he said quietly, as I took the chair next to his bed. "Makes you think about regrets." "Try not to stress yourself, Dad," I said, reaching for his hand. "Focus on recovery now." "No, I need to say this," he insisted. "I failed you, Claire. I was physically present but emotionally absent for most of your childhood. Then when I finally started paying attention, I let your mother dictate the terms of our family relationships rather than standing up for what was right. I knew how she treated you wasn't fair, but I took the easy path of least resistance." Tears filled his eyes, something I had seen only a handful of times in my life. "I'm sorry, truly sorry. I don't expect that to magically fix everything, but I needed you to hear it." The simple power of those words, the acknowledgement I had craved for decades, washed over me. "Thank you," I said, my own eyes welling up. "That means more than you know." "I'd like a second chance if you're willing," he continued. "Not to be the father of a child that time has passed, but to be a better father to the woman you've become, to really know you and support you as you are." "I'd like that too." I replied, squeezing his hand. This moment of reconciliation with my father stood in stark contrast to my continued impasse with my mother. Even during the family crisis of my father's hospitalization, she maintained her emotional walls, treating me with distant courtesy, but never acknowledging any need for healing between us. On the day of my father's discharge, she surprised me by asking if we could speak privately. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope that the medical scare had prompted reflection on her part as well. But her words quickly dispelled that notion. "Your father is in a fragile state," she said once we were alone in the hospital corridor. "He feels guilty about all sorts of things right now, including his relationship with you. I'm asking you not to take advantage of that vulnerability to turn him against me." The request was so characteristically self-centered that I almost laughed. Even in this moment, her primary concern was maintaining control and protecting her image, not healing family wounds. "I have no interest in turning anyone against you, Mother," I replied calmly. "I only want honest relationships with the people in my life, including Dad. What he and I discuss is between us." She pursed her lips, clearly dissatisfied with my response, but unable to find fault with it. "Well, we should all focus on his recovery now. Past grievances can wait." "Some things can wait," I agreed. "Others need to be addressed for real healing to occur, not just physical but emotional. Dad seems to understand that now." She offered no response, simply turning to walk back to my father's room, her posture rigid with disapproval. In that moment, I finally accepted what my therapist had been gently suggesting for years. My mother might never change, never acknowledge her role in our dysfunctional family dynamic, never offer the maternal love I had craved throughout my childhood. And for the first time, that realization didn't devastate me. It simply was a fact of life to be accepted, rather than a wound to be constantly reopened. A few weeks after my father returned home, I attended a community fundraiser where I unexpectedly encountered my mother. She was, as always, impeccably dressed and working the room with practiced charm. When our paths crossed, she greeted me with her social smile, the one reserved for acquaintances rather than family. "Claire, I hear your business is doing well," she said, her tone suggesting she was conferring approval from on high. "Very well," I confirmed. "We just won the Regional Design Award for our work with Boston Children's Hospital." Something flickered in her eyes, perhaps a grudging acknowledgement that my success was real and substantial. "Well, good for you. You always were, determined." Coming from my mother, this awkward, almost compliment was as close to validation as she was capable of offering. A year ago, I might have clung to these crumbs of approval. Now I simply accepted them for what they were, neither inflating their significance nor dismissing them entirely. "Thank you," I said simply before excusing myself to speak with other attendees. Later that evening, as the event wound down, I found myself alone at a quiet table with a glass of wine, reflecting on how different my life had become in just 6 months. The external circumstances hadn't changed dramatically. I still ran the same business, lived in the same apartment, maintained many of the same friendships. But internally, everything had shifted. The constant anxiety of seeking approval, the exhausting self-editing to fit others' expectations, the chronic disappointment of never being enough, all had been replaced by a quiet confidence in my own worth. I recalled something my therapist had said during our last session. Freedom isn't the absence of challenges or difficult people in your life. It's the ability to respond to them from a place of choice rather than compulsion. That was the gift I had given myself by finally confronting the reality of my family dynamic. Not a perfect resolution with everyone suddenly changing their behavior, but the liberation of no longer being controlled by my reactions to their behavior. I could choose how much contact to have, what boundaries to maintain, which relationships to invest in. The power had shifted from them to me, not in a vindictive way, but in the healthy rebalancing that occurs when an adult child finally sees family patterns clearly and decides to break them. 1 year to the day after the restaurant incident, I found myself at Sorolina again, this time alone by choice. I had just won a major industry award, and rather than waiting for validation that might never come, I decided to celebrate my own achievement. the host greeted me warmly. "Table for one tonight, Ms. Marshall." "Yes, thank you," I replied. "Something central would be lovely." As I was led to a prominent table in the main dining room, a server approached, coincidentally the same one who had witnessed my family drama a year earlier. Recognition flickered in his eyes. "It's nice to see you again," he said discreetly as he presented the wine list. "Thank you," I replied with a genuine smile. "It's nice to be back under different circumstances." As I settled in, another server approached to ask if I was waiting for others to join me. "No," I said confidently. "This table is perfect just for me." If you've ever had to create boundaries with family members who didn't appreciate your worth, leave a comment below sharing one small victory in your journey to self-acceptance. Learning to value ourselves independent of others' approval is one of life's greatest challenges, but also its most important reward. Like this video. If something in my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more authentic conversations about family dynamics and personal growth. Thank you for listening to my journey. And remember, sometimes the family who truly sees and appreciates you is the one you create for yourself.